Claire Ma is the co-founder of Sign, a company building identity infrastructure and verifiable credential systems for government digital ID programs. She's worked with governments worldwide and has a broad perspective on how national digital ID is evolving in the agentic AI era. I'm Joel McConvey, and on today's episode of the Biometric Update Podcast, I speak with Claire about the challenge of creating digital ID infrastructure in a diverse, changing world. So to start, can you please briefly introduce yourself and Sign and explain the concept of sovereign infrastructure for global nations?
Yeah, of course. Hello, everyone. I'm Claire, co-founder of Sign. So for Sign, we build sovereign digital infrastructures for global governments, specifically in two aspects. The first one is digital ID. Second one is financial system infrastructure. So we typically work with digital ministry and central banks. So for me, I personally lead the ID part. And on the identity side, we have two product offerings. The first one is VC, verifiable credential. That's typically built on top of whatever government's national ID that they currently have. Basically, citizens will hold their credentials as assets, and we allow users to share their credentials with their consent. We have selective disclosure, all of these features in it. And the second product we have is called TPL, Data Transaction Proof Layer. That's typically designed for systems like federated system where governments will have department exchanging data. So we have that layer on top as the auditing product for governments.
Okay. And so you're primarily then working with public entities, with governments on national digital ID projects?
Yes.
Okay. Well, that's quite a active area right now. Can you, from your perspective, give me a snapshot of the digital ID picture globally right now?
Yeah, of course. The clearest way to look, I think it's discussed a lot in this way globally around digital ID is the architecture model. And there are typically three patterns, right? That we have centralized, where I think the old Aadhaar system in India had a centralized system where basically every citizen data is stored in one place. And I think the old Pakistan system with NADRA, also a centralized system. And we have federated where I think Pakistan is moving more toward into where departments and credential issuers have the data, and they will be exchanging data on behalf of the citizen whenever that exchange is required to happen. And I was actually just at the conference by X-Road, and I think they are also the leader of federated system where the data exchange happens, and they will provide a system to prove that that exchange exactly happened at what time between what departments. And lastly, we have decentralized system where I think UID is also pushing forward toward that direction where citizens will have the ID and credentials as their asset. That's also what Sign is building toward. And I see that earlier this year, I went to Bhutan and they have this system called NDI, where I think they have 90% of adoption, where citizens have their apps and they hold on to their credential system. They hold on to their credential like assets. Whenever verification happens, they just use it cryptographically verified. And that's a more decentralized example that I see. And interestingly, in the States, it's in US, it's very different. We see that tech partners will play in it, like Apple Wallet and Google Wallet. They will work with different states on driver's license, and they don't actually have a national ID infrastructure that's like more unified as we see in other countries.
Mm-hmm. On that note, do you see a divide between the US and the rest of the world in terms of the role big tech is looking to play in digital ID?
I actually do. I think EU has their own standard pushing, and Estonia, right? And they are the leading country in this. And for US, it's very dependent on the state. And I know that Apple has been pushing it, the digital driver's license for a while, and I don't think the adoption is that high. And they have been pushing the real ID as well for the TSA checks. And I think they started last year, and the adoption rate is still not very high. And because I study in the States, and I know that a lot of people use driver's license as their ID, and then we have SSN for tax and welfare. So I feel like it's more fragmented, and in other different countries, we don't see these large tech companies play such an important role in ID initiatives. Mm-hmm. But that's just my perspective.
Yeah, well, thank you. So Sign's verifiable credential system aligns with the EUID standard that you mentioned earlier. Can you explain that alignment and maybe give people a little bit of a breakdown of the standard and what it's trying to do?
Yeah, of course. So, like I said, our VC verifiable credential system sits on a national ID, and we use the same building blocks as the UDI wallet. So we have the W3C verifiable credential for like the credential format, and an OpenID. I think it's the standard for issuance, and OpenID for verifiable credential presentations. And we also hold the same design philosophies. Like citizens hold the credentials. We have selected disclosure played into it, and we also have zero knowledge proof when verifying the data. However, I think like the implementation, just adding a note here, because I was reading an article earlier about the EUID age verification application. I see that like with the EUID architecture, like the framework all makes a lot of sense. That I think we are pushing toward the same standards. However, I see the implementation sometimes is like different from like what the framework seems to be pushing. And the age verification app got a lot of like pushback, and people look at the code and see that even the paint protection has some flaw in a code, which I think is quite interesting. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I don't know. They have a deadline later this year. I think December 2026. Let's see if all of the countries will be pushing out the wallets.
Yeah, it looks like no at this point, but
yeah.
I would ask, do you think the UDI wallet program is going to be transformational in terms of digital ID?
I think the push for the framework and the standard is good, and I think a lot of different regions are pushing for interoperability, brings up the conversation around digital ID. But I'm skeptical toward the actual implementation and adoption, because each country seems to be doing their own things. And even with the age verification application, I think they did a patch later on after the criticism, critics, mm-hmm. and they still like didn't fix the entire thing. But like the problem, I looked deeper into it. It's not like really hard problem. That a lot of the encryption method exists for a long time, right? I just think there's a gap definitely between the implementation mm-hmm. and the law and framework.
I want to switch gears for a minute and talk about agentic AI. Automation and AI agents are sort of becoming the norm in a lot of corporate operations and a lot of even government operations. You've said that machine handling is the future, and soon data exchange will run at machine speed. And when that happens, logging and auditing matter far more than they do today. Can you kind of expand on that and talk a bit about the state of agentic AI in general and what it's doing to the industry?
Yes, of course. So from our past conversation with governments, we were pushing the digital ID initiative. We definitely see an interest in sovereign AI adoption. Specifically, from our conversation with UAE, I know that earlier this year they were trying to involve agents in like government departments. I think they are trying to pair agents with human operators, where like decision will be granted by a human. They were pairing like agents with human as like assistant role. And I earlier this year I also see an MIT professor writing about India citizen like agents, how he's imagining is all of these citizens will have an agent for like civil services, whatever welfare application, all of these services that works with government departments. I definitely think that AI agent adoption in government will be inevitable, but that's also very concerning, because that means we need to design an architecture in a very nice way. If like anything wasn't designed really properly and everything is moving already at the machine speed, imagine now like all of the data exchange is built around human operators. Let's say a banker verifies a customer, right? And a government employee approves the benefit. All of these examples have human in a loop, and the speed of decision is still limited by the human cognitive speed. Mm-hmm. However, when we involve these agents and adopt these agents, that's what I mean, like by the machine speed data transaction. We definitely need an auditing tool. It wouldn't be an option. We need to know which agent act on behalf of which human in what department and at what time that data exchange happened. Because I definitely see that they will have some messed up in the future, and then who will be responsible? We need a clear legislative decision around that.
Yeah, accountability seems like kind of the core issue.
Exactly. Yeah.
You sort of spoken about a hybrid model for digital ID. What does that look like in your vision?
Yeah. So when I mentioned a hybrid model, I think I mentioned it from two different perspectives. The first one is decentralized versus centralized. So because we started off as the blockchain focused company, and like in a lot of technical partners that we talk with, they were really supportive of very decentralized approach. However, we still talk to a lot of governments and countries. We know what realistic scenarios looks like, and because different countries, they don't start from a blank paper. They start from, let's say, for India, they already have a centralized system, and they want to migrate into a decentralized way. There have to be a hybrid model in between where they need to take step by step. I think Pakistan is one example for it. So that previously they have notarized the centralized data points, and now they have NDEL, where I think it's National Data Exchange Layer, where everyone, whenever data exchange happen, they need to sign it. And I think 3 exchange of data marks 1 successful data exchange. They're developing standards around it. How Sign fits in it, I envision, is we provide TPL for a more federated system where they are probably migrating from centralized to federated, and then we support that. We don't just propose the fully decentralized solution to them from day one, because it's not realistic. Mm-hmm. And for countries who are, let's say Sierra Leone, we already signed an MOU with them. They have a national ID system. However, they don't have a digital ID yet. Then this is time when we will push for a more decentralized approach. That's what I meant by hybrid model. And also for the adoption and the technical implementation, it's also hybrid, where I believe to push for adoption, governments need to centralizedly think about who will be the issuers, who will define the data schema, and who will know that who owns which part of this system. Mm-hmm. And decentralized would play into end users. For citizens, when we design it, our design philosophy is we need to protect the end user data privacy at most, that it should be decentralized on the end user part.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that seems to be the way many people are thinking. It's a trick, right? Where you want to transform, but you don't want to transform into chaos.
Yeah.
I want to talk about Africa a bit. ID for Africa 2026 just wrapped in Cote d'Ivoire. You've suggested that some African countries are further ahead on digital ID than G7 nations. Is there a scenario where we see Africa or other entities in the global south leading on digital identity globally?
I think it's still, the honest answer will still separate in 2 layers. The first one is I was talking on in terms of legislative and architectural opportunity, where African countries are ahead, as previously they don't have maybe a more messy system as some of the other countries. So there's definitely more opportunities in African countries. And also we see that there are great examples already. We have the, what's that called? The modular open source ID platform. Mm-hmm. that was built in Bangalore, and now I think about 9 or 10 countries already have adopted this. Mm-hmm. And we also see Ghana, right? I think I talk about that in News Ghana, where Ghana card have reached about 20 million people, and I think around 90% of the population. And I also know that Rwanda raised from World Bank about the digital ID system next year. So I definitely see harder push from these African countries on digital ID initiative. I believe they will move much faster than other countries trying to transform this system.
Mm-hmm. Do you think there's an advantage in countries where there's not sort of this rooted individualism? I mean, I'm thinking about the U.S., where people are generally very suspicious of government. Do you think that they're in a place like India, where that culture isn't necessarily the same? Does that make it easier to get people to adopt digital ID?
Yeah, I think so. I think one example that comes up is the UK example where like they actually have selective disclosure in a system, but people still like didn't like it also because of how the government trying to narrate around it was, I think, anti immigrant population, or I think it matters from a lot of it has a lot of factors play in it, like how the government is framing this, and also like how it is technically implemented. Like in US, I don't think people will be on board. They will think about it as a surveillance tool, even though that maybe like in reality, the technical implementation protect users' data privacy. They will still think about it as a surveillance tool.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think you're right. And in India, I think they are also trying to have all of the phone pre-install the Aadhaar app, where like people are still accepting that, which I think it wouldn't happen in other countries.
Yeah. Is there a path to global trust for digital ID? Can we get people on board across the board?
Yeah, I think with the EU ID, it will help that it emphasize. I think it does a really good job in advertising it as like user protecting digital ID. But I do think digital ID will be inevitable. Like it or not, we will move into that era. Just like how I feel about the agent thing, that government is definitely going to adopt it just for efficiency and for digitalization. However, I think like how the government would approach it will be different. Like India, Aadhaar system. I don't think other countries will be having apps pre-installed into citizen phone. Like each of the government we talk with, they are pretty familiar with like what their citizen might be open to adopt, and all of them are starting from a pilot state. For example, when we were doing with Sierra Leone, we work closely with the policymaker as well. They will push for adoption. However, they wouldn't push it that hard that citizens will feel very uncomfortable about it. We actually had a conversation about it, and I think a voluntary enrollment is also really important. That citizens feel like they are adopted into the system, not like forced to accept this.
I noticed you've done some research with VR and healthcare and accessibility tech in your past. Do you see digital ID fitting into the sort of global healthcare picture at all?
Oh yeah, thanks for mentioning that. So before co-founding Sign, I was working with educational facility on mostly elderly care and healthcare sector and inclusive design. And I definitely think VC, a verifiable credential, doesn't have to be pushing from like entirely to the governments and they change the entire system. It can work in a vertical scenario as well. And healthcare definitely is a very useful scenario. Let's say cross-border medical records. I still remember when I went to the States for studying, I tried to get my dentist record from my home country, and it was like nearly impossible. So I had to do everything fresh again. So let's think about it. A citizen of Sierra Leone needs an emergency care, maybe in Nigeria. That's like when it's really needed. And also like for in an era maybe like a pandemic, we really need like proof of immunity or things like that. Verifiable credential needs to, it's very important in the healthcare sector. So especially I think in an interoperability scenario where you need cross-border medical records.
Yeah. So we're kind of getting to the end of our time, but I have, my last question typically is about the future. Where do you see Sign in, let's say, 2 to 3 years in terms of your position in the industry, governments you are working with, projects that you have on the go? Where are you heading?
Yeah. So like I said, we focus on two things: identity, credentials, identity including credentials and data exchange, and a financial system. So all of these contracts we sign with government, typically it's about like, for ID projects, it's 1 or 2 years. For financial system, it's about 4 or 5 years. So we are thinking in the future, these two will definitely merge, and we would have programmable money after we build a digital ID system and digital money system. And let's say welfare system, Stein will be doing a lot of these use cases building on top of these infrastructure as well. So really, we want Stein to be the digitalization tech partners with these governments to build for the citizens and build for the government for digital transformation.
Thanks to Claire Ma for taking the time to speak with the Biometric Update Podcast. And thanks to you for listening. For more on Sign, visit sign.global. And for all the news from everywhere in the world of biometrics, be sure to visit www.biometricupdate.com.